The day she pulled into his garage, Cole Renner had grease on his hands, a cold coffee on the workbench, and exactly zero interest in impressing anyone. He heard the car before he saw it. A low, flat rumble that didn't belong to anything made after 1985, followed by the particular sound of something wrong. A knock at the back end, irregular, like a heartbeat skipping. He set down the wrench he'd been using on Mr. Pelletier's Silverado and walked to the bay door. The car was a 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS. White, with the green script along the lower door, one of maybe 1,500 ever made, and it was being driven by someone who clearly had no idea what she had. He knew this because she'd driven it in neutral for the last block. He could tell by the way the engine sound had changed, the slight hesitation when she'd rolled to a stop. You don't do that to a Carrera RS. You don't do that to any car, but especially not that one. She got out without hurrying. She was somewhere in her late 30s, dressed like she'd just come from a meeting that cost more than his monthly rent. Dark coat, heels that made no sense on the gravel. She looked at the garage the way people look at hardware stores when they've never been in one, slightly uncertain about the layout, but determined not to show it. "Is this Renner's?" she asked. "Signs on the road," Cole said. She looked back at the road, then back at him. "Right, good." She glanced at the Porsche. "I was told you're the only one in Harwick who works on these." "Depends on the problem. It makes a noise." Cole looked at the car. He already knew more about its problem than she did, but he walked around it anyway. Slowly, the way his father had taught him, because a car will tell you things if you let it. He crouched near the rear axle, checked the seam near the engine lid, straightened up and looked at the front left tire. "Who told you to bring it here?" "A man named Pelletier. He said you were honest." Cole almost smiled. That was the highest thing old Pelletier had ever said about anyone. "Leave it," he said. "I'll look at it this afternoon." She didn't move right away. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place, not suspicious, not rude, more like she was solving something. "I need it back by Friday," she said. "Then you should have brought it Monday. It's Wednesday. I know what day it is." She was quiet for a moment, then something shifted in her face, and she said, almost lightly, like she was thinking out loud, "Fix it by Friday, and I'll take you to dinner." Cole looked up. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something at the corner of her mouth. "I'll take you to dinner," she said again, clearer this time, "at Thornfield, the one on King Street." Thornfield was the kind of restaurant where they didn't put prices on the menu. Cole had driven past it exactly once, on his way somewhere else. "I don't need dinner," he said. "I need until Monday." She held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then she took out a card and set it on the workbench beside his coffee. "Call me when you find something," she said. Her name, as it turned out, was Ingrid Halse. He looked up the card after she left because he was curious, which he told himself was professional. She was the founder of a property development company based in Toronto. She had offices in 3 cities and had been profiled in Report on Business 2 years ago. The article's headline used the word formidable. Cole read the first 2 paragraphs and then put his phone away. He went back to the Porsche. The knock was coming from the rear trailing arm, worn bushings, probably original, which would be consistent with a car that had been sitting more than it had been driven. The fuel lines needed inspection. One of the cooling tin panels was loose and had been rubbing against the fan shroud, which explained the secondary noise she probably hadn't noticed. None of it was catastrophic. All of it needed time. He was underneath it when his daughter appeared in the bay door. Hazel was 9, and she was carrying a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over, which meant she had walked there alone, which they had an agreement about. "We said you'd call first," Cole said from under the car. "I did call. You didn't answer." He checked his phone. She was right. He had 3 missed calls and a voicemail from his sister that he hadn't listened to yet. "What's in the bag?" "Cinnamon knots. Mrs. Boudreau gave me an extra one." She set the bag on the workbench and looked at the Porsche. "Whose is it?" "Customer." "It's pretty." She tilted her head. "Is it old?" "Older than me." "That's really old," she said seriously. Cole came out from under the car, sat up, and looked at her. She had paint on her sleeve, blue and green, and her braids were coming loose on one side. She had her mother's eyes. She had her mother's way of standing with one foot slightly forward, like she was always just about to walk somewhere. "Did you finish your project?" he asked. "Almost. I need more blue. There's a tube in the kitchen drawer. That one's dried up." He wiped his hands on a rag. I'll get more this weekend. The project's due Friday. Everything, apparently, was due Friday. He called Ingrid Halse that evening after Hazel was in bed. He'd found the additional problem by then, a crack in one of the heat exchangers, small but real, the kind of thing that becomes expensive if you ignore it. She answered on the second ring. The bushings are shot, he said. I can do those, no problem. But there's a crack in the left heat exchanger. It needs to be replaced, not patched. A pause. What does that mean in terms of time? It means I need to source the part, possibly from the States. Could be a week, could be 2 weeks. I said could be. Another pause. He could hear something in the background, the ambient sound of a large, quiet building. Not a home. An office, maybe. Or a hotel. Is the car drivable? She asked. Not safely. Not right now. All right. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll need a loaner. I'm a one-bay operation, Miss Halse. I don't have a fleet. I'm not asking for a fleet. I'm asking for one car. He looked across the garage at the gray 2008 Subaru Outback he drove to pick up parts on weekdays. It had 214,000 kilometers on it and a crack in the dashboard that he'd covered with electrical tape. I have something, he said. It's not what you're used to. I don't care what I'm used to. I care about getting from point A to point B. He thought about that later, after he'd hung up. He wasn't sure why it stayed with him. Something about the way she'd said it. Not performing. Just stating a fact. She came by the next morning to drop off a key and pick up the Subaru. She walked around it once, looked at the cracked dashboard through the window, and didn't say a word about it. Thank you, she said. That was all. She came back 4 days later with a bag of groceries. Actual groceries, not a gesture bag with nice crackers in it. There was pasta and a jar of sauce and 2 kinds of cheese and a container of soup from a deli he recognized from the next town over. There was also a small set of watercolor paints. He looked at them. The blue ones are good, she said. Better than craft store. I have a contact who imports them. He looked at her. Your daughter, she said. She mentioned a project. I heard it when I called back and you'd left the phone on the bench. He didn't know what to do with this. He thanked her, which felt insufficient, and she said it was nothing, which he didn't believe. She started coming by in the evenings, not every day, but enough that it became a pattern. He wasn't sure when that happened. She'd sit on the stool near the workbench while he worked, and sometimes she'd talk, and sometimes she wouldn't. She'd grown up in Winnipeg. Her father had been an electrician. She'd left at 18 on a scholarship and hadn't gone back in any way that counted, which was something she said like a fact, but sounded like a wound. She'd been married once. Briefly, she said. He didn't ask more, and she didn't offer more, but she said the word briefly in a way that meant it had not been brief enough. Hazel liked her. That was the thing Cole hadn't expected and couldn't explain away. Hazel was careful with new people. She'd been careful since losing her mother, in the specific way that grief makes children careful, like they've learned that good things can be taken, so they hold them at a distance first. But she'd accepted Ingrid's paints without the usual reserve. She'd shown her the project, a map of an imaginary country she'd been building for months, rivers and mountain ranges drawn in colored pencil, and Ingrid had asked about it seriously, the way adults rarely do when children show them things. She'd asked about the capital city and why it was where it was, and Hazel had explained for 20 minutes without stopping. Cole had stood in the doorway of the kitchen and listened and felt something he didn't have a name for. The part arrived from a supplier in Pennsylvania on a Thursday. Cole called Ingrid that afternoon. It's here, he said. I can have it done by end of day Saturday. There was a pause then. I should tell you something. He waited. I knew about the heat exchanger before I brought it in, she said. I had it looked at in Toronto. They told me what it needed. I drove down here because... She stopped. Because why? Because Pelletier told me about you. Not just that you were honest. He told me about your wife. And about the garage. And he said you were the kind of person who did the work properly, which is rarer than it should be. A pause. I'm telling you because I don't want it to seem like I was being strategic. Cole sat with that. Were you? He asked. A little, she said quietly. Not about the car, about being here. He didn't answer right away. He was in the garage, and it was evening, and the light through the bay door was the particular amber that happened in October in Harwick, when the maples on Rideau Street had turned, and the whole town smelled like cold air and dry leaves. The dinner offer, he said finally. Thornfield on King Street. Still stands. I'm not good at restaurants like that. Neither am I, she said. I just pretend. The Saturday morning he finished the car, Hazel was in the garage with him. She'd asked to watch, and he'd said yes under the condition that she stayed on the stool and didn't touch anything without asking. She'd upheld this perfectly for the first 40 minutes and then migrated to the floor with a book, which was close enough. He'd just finished torquing the rear axle nuts when she said, without looking up, "Do you like her?" Cole put down the torque wrench. "She's a good customer," he said. Hazel turned a page. "That's not what I asked." He looked at his daughter. She was 9 years old, and she said things with a directness that sometimes made him feel like she was the older one. Her mother had been like that too. Straight through to the point, without cruelty, just clarity. "I don't know yet," he said. Hazel considered this. "That's okay," she said. "You can not know for a while." He called Ingrid when the car was done. She arrived within the hour, which meant she hadn't been far. She walked straight to the Porsche and put her hand on the roof. Not the gesture of someone checking a car, but something closer to relief. "Start it," Cole said. She looked at him. "You should hear it running clean," he said. "So you know what it's supposed to sound like." She got in and turned the key, and the engine came up the way a healthy flat six comes up. Immediate, even, with that distinctive Porsche texture that you feel in your chest more than here. No knock, no rattle, just the car doing what it was built to do. She sat in it for a moment with the door open, listening. Then she got out and she looked at him and she said, "Thank you," properly, not just for the car. Cole nodded. "I looked up the labor rate," she said. "Your invoice is short. The loaner didn't cost me anything." Cole. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed. "I'll adjust it," he said. She paid without another word about it. She was writing the check on the workbench when Hazel came in from the back, in her coat, with her backpack on, because Saturday meant his sister usually picked her up for the afternoon. Hazel looked at Ingrid. "Is your car fixed?" "It is. Did he do a good job?" "The best," Ingrid said. Hazel looked at her father with a complicated expression, something between approval and a kind of knowing that had no business being on the face of a 9-year-old. Then his sister's car appeared in the drive, and Hazel went out, calling goodbye over her shoulder without breaking stride. The garage was quiet. Cole looked at the Porsche, and then at Ingrid, and then at the floor. "The offer," he said. "I said I wasn't good at places like that. You said it. I don't necessarily believe it. What if we started somewhere easier?" She looked at him. "There's a place on Garrison Street," he said. "Good fish and chips. You can see the water from the window if you get a table on the left side." Something in her face shifted, the careful composure she wore like a second coat, moving slightly to one side. "All right," she said. They went that evening. They got a table on the left side, and the light off the water was the same amber as it had been in the garage, and they talked for 2 hours without it feeling like 2 hours. She told him about the first building she'd ever developed, a small mixed use in Saskatoon, back when she had almost no money and no track record, just a plan she'd written in a rented room at 2 in the morning. He told her about the last car his wife had driven, a Civic, nothing remarkable, but he'd gone over it the week after the funeral because he needed to do something with his hands, and he hadn't known what else to do. He hadn't told that to many people. She didn't make it into anything. She just listened. On the walk back to the garage to get his truck, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "The joke I made when I brought the car in." He remembered. "Dinner." "I wasn't entirely joking." "I know," he said. "You knew. You said it twice," he said. "People don't repeat a joke." She laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh without holding something back, and it changed the whole shape of her face. "I've been working on this for months," she said, "and you figured it out in 30 seconds. I've been reading engines for 20 years. People aren't that different." She was quiet for a moment. They were standing in the parking lot beside his truck, and the town around them was doing what small towns do in the evening, settling into itself, the lights in windows, the smell of wood smoke from somewhere up the street. "I'm not easy to be around," she said. "I've been told that. I haven't found that. You haven't known me long." "No," he said. "But I've watched you ask my daughter real questions about an imaginary country, so I think I have some information." She looked at him for a moment and then looked away toward the water. "I'm in Harwick through the end of the month," she said. "There's a property I'm looking at, on the edge of town." "I know the one," he said. "Old warehouse on the canal. You know it? Small town." She nodded slowly. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. I mean with, she stopped. I haven't done this in a long time. Neither have I. She looked at him then, directly, the way she'd looked at him the first morning over the roof of the Porsche, like she was solving something. Okay, she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a resolution. It was the specific word people use when they've decided to stop talking themselves out of something. Cole understood it, because he had been talking himself out of things for 3 years. Okay, he said back. He drove home through the maple-lined streets of Harwick, and when he got in, the kitchen light was on. His sister had left it, the way she always did, and there was a drawing on the table. Hazel's imaginary country, rendered this time in the new watercolors, the rivers blue and bright, the mountains careful and small, and in the bottom corner, in her careful printing, more to explore. Cole stood there for a moment in the quiet house. Then he made himself a coffee, and he sat down, and for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to figure out what came next. He already knew.